Welcome to Relationscapes. It's the podcast where we explore human identity and connection because we want to make the world suck a little bit less. I'm journalist Blair Hodges in Salt Lake City, and our guide in this episode about raising feminist sons is journalism professor Sonora Jha.
You have to pick a place in the world where you are willing to resist and organize now. And he is doing a lot of that. You know, when the Dobbs decision came, he called me and he said, "We are marching in the streets. I'm part of organizing the protests in Los Angeles. Mama, do you think they'll come?" And I said, "Oh, honey, yeah, they'll come. The women will be there. The trans people will be there. People are going to protest this." And the next day he called and he said, "Oh my God, there were so many people that came to the protest."
Leaving India was not an easy decision for Sonora Jha, but she hoped the United States might offer more room and more possibility for a single mother like her to raise her son with feminist values. Of course, America's got plenty of its own problems. It still takes a lot to help a boy navigate a culture here that's saturated with misogyny, where the manosphere awaits to tell him all his problems can be blamed on women and queer people, where concepts like consent and bodily autonomy are mocked, and where solidarity with marginalized people is dismissed as virtue signaling. Sonora has ideas about how to fend off influencers, friends, and politicians who are trying to make misogyny great again. She draws on academic research, her background in journalism, and her own experiences raising her son as a single immigrant mother of color. She puts that all into her book, How to Raise a Feminist Son, Motherhood, Masculinity, and the Making of My Family, and she joins us to talk about it right now. Sonora Jha, welcome to Relationscapes.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So as a single mom of one son, you say that you love going to movies with your son and that you've done this throughout his life. It actually became an excellent place to help you build what you call a tender-hearted, sharp-witted feminist boy. And that surprised me because to me, American film is hardly a bastion of feminist thought and representation. So tell me how these movies helped you raise a feminist son.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I mentioned that in the essay. We were watching both Hollywood and Bollywood and foreign film and, everything. Partly it was for my own benefit because I absolutely love the movies and I was definitely going to raise a kid that loved the movies. And then as I started taking him to films, we would start chatting right from the time that he was a 1-year-old infant, which, could be considered problematic, but he was quiet at the movies. And later we'd have these great conversations about, what was going on, who were the characters, the character development. And I saw in it a great opportunity to talk about the representation of women and females and girls in the films and, other marginalized groups, right? Because that's just my political leaning. But we were making these conversations really fun and engaging and, right from Disney films to later, the Marvel and DC, the superhero films and action films and all kinds of films. So it just became a place where we could have these conversations that were about the characters in the films, but also sort of about our own lives and my own life as a woman, his life as a young boy, talk about race and gender and politics and sort of make jokes about, oh my God, that guy, he just, it was all about revenge for him. And the women were just, little props for his own journey and, little sort of inserting these little feminist takes into the discussion of film. So, and even today, my son will call me and say, have you watched this, have you watched In Treatment? Well, it's, this Black woman therapist who is interviewing people who's, she's talking to people about their lives and without making it a feminist discussion, it's just like feminism is part of storytelling. And so it just became one of those places where I say in the book, I was raising a feminist in the dark in a way, just sort of like feeling my way around in the dark, but also in the dark of the theater.
I like how you mentioned that he's seeing the film, but he's also knowing that you're seeing the film as well. And so there's also some he's got to think about how you're seeing it as well because you're watching it together.
Yes, yes. And there was this moment when, he was older. I think he was in high school, and we went to watch The Rise of the Planet of the Apes.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was resisting it. I was like, I don't want to see a movie about monkeys. And he said, well, it's apes. It's about apes. And so let's go watch it. There's a scene in it that I want you to watch. And I was in the movie theater, and there's the scene, I mean, no spoilers, but there's the scene where Caesar, the ape, there's a moment of resistance, and it's so dramatic and so compelling. And basically Caesar has language, and he says no when he's being beaten by the zookeeper. And so my son was watching my face as I watched the screen. And because for him, he knew that he wanted to see his mother's face in this moment where there's resistance and where there's rebellion, and there's this moment of like fascination with a development of a character and all of those things, right? And so it was a language too of both of unusual lives and of saying no and resisting, but also the magic of cinema. So yeah, I mean, those moments are just so unforgettable. And I think he was watching. He was sort of bringing back to me the things that I had been doing to him as a child.
Yeah, and you talk about how film encourages empathy, and you say that empathy is really foundational for feminism, for anyone. Empathy, the ability to to take on other people's perspectives, to think about how other people feel. And film gave you a great place to help practice that. And I think a lot of parents are worried about the media that their kids are taking in, or people who aren't parents might be wondering like, oh man, kids today are bombarded with so much garbage through social media and through YouTube and streamers. And so you don't even have to be a parent to be worried about the kind of messages kids might be getting through media. You're advising that parents don't just try to put our kids in a bubble and put children in a bubble, but to go there with them and to help equip them to think about, to be critics of media.
Absolutely, absolutely. To have conversations, whatever it might be, and a critical appreciation is what we were doing. I love a lot of action movies while I'm cringing and saying, "Oh my God, all this violence," So, and as a single mom who was a media scholar, who was, I make a quip in the book too about how I would put my son down in front of the television as I wrote about the effects of media on kids, right?
Yeah.
So, a single parents will tell you there's very little time and you're trying to get your work done and everything. So I do think that the media were co-parenting along with me, So, but what was crucial and what stays crucial today is to have those conversations, sort of be part of it. There are many aspects to media that I don't enjoy, but because my son is part of that, right? I will listen to the occasional Joe Rogan. I will listen to, what's attractive to young men today in these podcasts and these things. I will go sort of just dip my toe. I can't go too deep into that stuff,
Yeah.
but sort of be aware so that I can have those conversations and so that I don't alienate my child or have too strong a generational divide, right? So I think just being aware that those things are so compelling and so addictive that they are going to get to your child no matter what. All your child's going to feel like they're missing out on something, right?
And then there's resentment there. Like my parents are controlling. They don't understand me. They're out of touch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when he was growing up, all these, Facebook and all this social media was coming in. And so it's about the conversations you have with your child, even occasionally, right? Like there were some times when I would say, switch that off. That's horrible. What's going on? Like, Grand Theft Auto. And then he would say, yeah, well, yeah, you're going to hate this because blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, I do hate it. Can you start? I mean, he said, well, I'm going to play it for a little while. I mean, I know that this is problematic. I'm just going to play it. And, so it was, I mean, I didn't know that I was doing the right thing, but you sort of question yourself, raise questions. So not raise objections, but raise questions and get them to think critically along with you and say, maybe I don't know this. Can you explain it to me? Can you tell me why this doesn't bother you? And those kinds of conversations. And you're not going to win every time, but somewhere you hope that there's going to be, you'll sow a seed of doubt and also maybe learn something yourself. And because you're not going to stem the tide of social media and all who knows what else is to come, right?
That is such good advice, to raise questions instead of objections and to ask for their advice too. You talk about learning from being open to their perspective as well, and being willing to do some give and take. And that can be really scary, obviously. Like you said, Grand Theft Auto can be really violent. That's a video game. But you're also getting your kid to think about it. Like, how do you feel about it when you see this character in a video game beating someone up or shooting someone? Or what does it feel like? And tell me why you want to play that. So then you're hearing them out. They feel more heard. They're probably more likely to value your opinion or trust you.
Yes. I was recently in New York and I was at this benefit event, and there was a mother of a much younger child who was 12. My son is grown now. And she was talking about how she says, I'm losing my relationship with my son. And he started saying such objectionable things and started to side with his dad and feel like I am too pushy and I'm too bossy with my husband and with his dad. And he feels bad for the men in the family. And I don't know what's going on because he was just such a sweet boy. And, he's about 12 or 13. And I was just thinking about that now, with all this stuff that we're learning about how young men have been feeling disaffected and disenfranchised in many ways,
right?
That parents are beginning to feel this need to have conversations with them that don't, you're watching your kids sort of be taken away from you in their minds and their hearts and their emotional lives and their growth. And so I think it's become even more important to have those, to not get on the defensive, but sort of say, why do you think so? And what's going on with you, with a lot of care, I think, because I think when they're 12 and 13, they're not fully formed and you can't be, and yet they are sort of being either conscripted into a certain kind of masculinity by all those influences outside, or are searching, right? And especially if they're searching, you want to be there as part of that search and see, where is it coming from? Where's that feeling of being disaffected coming from?
Right. Well, let's go back to where it began for you as a parent. You found out you were pregnant when you were 26. You were living in India, and you learned that the baby was expected to be a boy. And you say that your husband rejoiced, but that you wept. Mm-hmm. And that actually wasn't how women in India, or a lot of the people you knew, usually reacted. So why were you so upset when you found out that you were having what was presumed to be a boy?
Yeah, and this was the difficult part to write about in the book, that I grew up in what is a Brahminical patriarchy. So it's the Brahmin, the upper caste people, especially the men, who have, sort of like an equivalent of the white male in the Western world, and especially in America, have a sort of a high level of entitlement and privilege and a lot of brutal history. And so my family was fairly violent, especially the men in the family, my father, my brother, immediate influences. And I had mostly seen violence and a sort of protector kind of model. Either you're being disciplined or you're being protected or you're being basically harmed, and I was really afraid that having this boy, the son, how do I stop him from growing into the same thing? So it was partly a huge psychological shock for me that, wait a minute, will I have anything to do with the way he's raised? Will he be like them? Will he grow up to beat me? Will he grow up to raise his hand on me?
Yeah.
And will we just repeat history here, or will I have any influence here? So I burst into tears because what I wanted to raise was a feminist, right? And to me at the time, feminist meant a woman, a girl. And so I was all ready to I'm going to raise a strong girl, and she's going to be. And then I was like, how do I put this title on a boy though? And so that was all those were the coherent thoughts that came a little bit after the crying, but the crying was really from the shock of it and from feeling helpless in that moment and feeling like the patriarchy would just snatch my child and make him a violent, oppressive person. And I wasn't really going to be part of his story in a kind way.
And you talk about how difficult it was for you because you were still growing into feminism. You were still learning about feminism because before raising a feminist, you needed to try to be one yourself and understand what it was about. And you say you actually first heard the word feminist when you were about 20 years old. And Then you had more of a feminist awakening about 3 years later as a news reporter in India. So take us to those experiences and how that shaped what feminism is to you.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I again, the word feminism is an English word, right? And it's a Western word, but it's definitely a phenomenon that everyone across the world experiences. Women and children women and girls who have resisted, who have seen some sort of oppression and raised their voice against it, or felt inequities. Even if you sense inequities and feel and are aware of them, I think you're a feminist, right? So I already was a feminist. I think as far back as consciousness can take me, I remember feeling that my brother had different rules and I had different rules. I did not know I could resist them. I did not know I could, but I just knew that this was wrong. This was horribly wrong, and I felt marginalized, right? So, but then when I learned of feminism, I started to read all these books. Germaine Greer, one of this early influences, Simone de Beauvoir, reading feminist books, watching Indian feminist cinema. There was the alternative cinema that was growing in India that was writing that was depicting a lot of social issues, among them the oppression of women and people of lower castes and things. And so, watching a lot of that and feeling validated. All of that was really important. And then when I became a journalist and I was traveling across India, writing these stories of the marginalized, I started to think more about these things. And there was this one particular moment, and I write about it in the book, where I'm at this Allahabad railway station in in northern India, which is more patriarchal. And
Relatively.
but degrees, yes, the degrees of those things, right? But I was at this railway station and I was very hot. It was about 105 degrees, and I was clothed from top to toe to be modest and not attract attention. And I was 23 or 22, and I really, really badly wanted to take a cold shower. And there were these showers that were meant only for men who were ascetic, sort of like sadhus, or what we call them in India, the sort of like wandering religious men. And these were open, because these men are basically just wearing what's called a loincloth, or like a little thing around their waist. And I just stripped down and I started to take a shower. Now I was hidden by just two little brick walls, but anyone could see me if they came in, invaded that space. And at that age, you're sort of like a little more foolhardy. But I remember feeling such shame and such despair at just being this human being that was hot and couldn't take a shower, whereas men around me could do whatever they wanted. And I just felt like this is so wrong. And I wanted to, in that moment, I just wanted to go home and be protected and not be doing these stories that would take me away from, home and everything. But then home was a dangerous place too. And so that was a strong feminist awakening. And that, that in some ways I was privileged. I was as, English speaking, Bombay raised, urban schooled, young woman of relative privilege. And I was leaving behind these other people whose situation would not change just by taking a train and going back to the city, and even in the city, there were other kinds of perils that were awaiting me. And so learning to have that feminist lens, or, really letting myself have that feminist lens on everything that I did and saw and thought about was really became a part of survival in a way.
The more that you understood about a woman's place in India, the more worried you were that your son would slip into the same kind of patriarchal patterns and possibly become abusive, and it would be such a bigger challenge to raise a feminist there. And you decided to choose a less privileged life for him in America. You saw this as a path for him to become feminist himself, to remove him from that context. And that's a really big decision. Do you think you would have made that move if you hadn't had a son, or is it all kind of part of the same package?
Yeah, there are two tracks, right? One is just like what things that are happening in my personal life, and then things that are intellectually making sense, and then the coming together of those, right? So I moved to Singapore with my former husband, my first husband, and I had a little more education than him, so we decided our next move could be to the United States. I had never, ever wanted to move to the United States. A lot of my friends in college were moving here to study. and as undergraduates. And I had no idea. It was like, oh, terrible capitalist nation, don't want to go there ever. And I loved my country and I loved being a journalist in India, So I had no plans, but my husband had wanted to leave. So I was doing the good wifely thing and quitting my good journalism jobs in every city and moving along with him. And Singapore was not that great for me as a journalist. And so, we decided, okay, let's go to the US. I come here to the US to do my PhD, which was I was really excited to do in political communication, which was so much in track with the things that I was doing back in India and wanted to do here. And so I came here to do that. And along the way, I had a car accident and needed multiple ankle surgeries after that. And so my then husband was supposed to follow me and he decided not to. And so there was a break at that time in our marriage. We went our separate ways. And so the big decision then for me was, do I go back to India or do I stay in the United States? And in that moment of reckoning and thinking about, do I raise my son among my people, which would be the Brahminical patriarchy of my father, my brother, those influences, and the additional challenge of raising being a single mom with an only child in India, which was rarer at the time. It's become much more common and there are more alternative ways of being now. But those were all the thoughts that were swimming around my head. And so to me, denying him the privilege of being sort of in this Brahminical patriarchy, which for him would be wonderful. Every time we go back to India, he's treated like a king. Like a prince at least, right? And whereas here, him being raised as a young man of color, boy of color, and also not very typically privileged, that we don't have generational wealth, we don't have generational contacts, a lot of those things that are difficult for immigrant families. And yet, so, partly it was where his mother will thrive, right? Where is his mother going to thrive? And is that kind of thriving also good for him in many ways? And I made that choice to stay here. And even for me, a little more difficult of a life as, disabled and single parent away from, family, at least family help. But I haven't regretted it.
Mm. How are you feeling about the context now? Because as you mentioned earlier, we're seeing an uptick in young men kind of becoming radicalized or shifting over to the right and falling into more traditionalist or patriarchal thinking about the roles of men and women, not to mention the fact that trans and non-binary folks are sort of being oppressed or ignored altogether. So when you're thinking about the context of the US compared to India, where are your thoughts now?
They're very complicated. In so many ways, I do think that it's going to be important to be global. A lot of people, again, are talking about where do we go away from the United States, right? And it was difficult raising him, and especially watching him turn from a cute boy of color, like a cute brown boy, into a young brown man who is then seen as a threat. That was so informative to me and so devastating. When he was a young man, seeing that people saw him as a possible thief or a possible, burglar in some situations.
Yeah, neighbors had called the police on him when he was trying to get into the house. He was locked out.
Right. Right. And then this was very close to the Trayvon Martin tragedy and, horrific murder of Trayvon Martin. And so having that moment of reckoning and seeing where America has gone even since, my son and I still have those conversations. And I've asked him, do you think I should have raised you in India? But there was this moment when he was 18 years old and we'd gone back, before he left for college, we went back to India to do this trip. And he said to my mother, I've seen that women in India are not treated well. I'm treated better than my mother here. And to see that he saw that, and he felt uncomfortable. He's talked about how he feels so much more comfortable being brown-skinned among brown-skinned people.
Yeah.
Being a young man in India, being treated as better than me, I guess. But also here, he is a young man of color and, knowing racism in a visceral way. For me, it was like I would much rather be among the marginalized and oppressed than be the oppressor in India, right? And inevitably, you fall into certain class and caste structures there. to resisting. You have to pick a place in the world where you are willing to resist and organize now. And he is doing a lot of that. He's a socialist feminist. And he, when the Dobbs decision came, he called me and he said, we are marching in the streets. I'm part of organizing the protests in Los Angeles. And I've made all the, the banners and the protest signs and everything. Mama, do you think they'll come? And I said, oh, honey, yeah, they'll come. The women will be there. The trans people will be there. People are going to protest this. And the next day he called and he said, oh my God, there were so many people that came to the protest. And so I'm very proud of him for being an organizer and an activist. And being on the side of resistance is important to both of us. And he is definitely doing much more than I am. But yes, he also feels like America may not be the place to be in a few years. So which is the place on earth where we can make a better world is something that we talk about now. It's up in the air,
You mentioned your disability. You had polio as a child, and I think your leg is
my right leg.
Your right leg, right. But then on top of that, you mentioned the car accident that you were in that caused some pretty bad damage. And this was a turning point, it seemed like to me, in your story, because up until then, you really were a single parent, really doing a lot on your own, really thinking of it as you and your son and then the world. But you recognized that in order to raise a feminist son, you would need community. And this accident was a turning point in making you seek that community, almost because you had to.
Yes. In India, I would have an automatic community of family and extended family and friends. And here I was a stranger. After I finished my PhD in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I arrived in Seattle and really I knew no one but the chair of the department that hired me. And so I had to sort of like start from scratch and build a whole life from scratch, right? From the ground up. And my son was, at the time, he was 8, about to be 9. And so to seek out friends and to seek out friends who would be that community in which I wanted to raise my son with the sense of empathy, with the sense of shared experiences of being marginalized, shared experiences of even people who were allies who wanted to do the right things, and just people that we got along with, right? Like not everyone had to be a sort of activist, right? But it was really important for me to build a feminist village, and that's what I call it still. To have the kind of influences of people who were really smart or really wise and empathetic, and sort of give my son a sense of a larger world beyond ourselves, and be really supportive as well. And that village comes, it's just, either I've been really, privileged with that, or I've worked really hard at it, or just that human beings are really kind and are seeking those connections. But I feel very fortunate to have made that community and built that community and have it still be sustained.
I like seeing the different relationships that your friends could have with your son, because a parent-child relationship is a pretty particular thing, and it can vary depending on the parents and the children. But the relationship between friends and a child can also be really interesting. These offer other adults that the kid can kind of like triangulate their views off of, or maybe this person can empathize with them on something that the parent can't as much, or they might be able to advocate for the parent on something. And so you have these friends around you that had feminist ideals, and they could have a relationship with your son as well.
Absolutely. It's the concept of the chosen family, right?
Yeah.
Like that we can have all of this, and friends can be chosen family. Even today, my son has a lot of regard and very close friendships, and is a very loyal friend, a very giving friend. And that's something that I, whatever may be happening in our lives, I see him doing that. And I feel like that's the one thing that has really gone right. Like you're there for your friends and they're there for you. And there's a tenderness in that friendship where you can pick up the phone and talk to them about anything, talk about breakups and be really sweet and tender and be, not have to keep up like this macho kind of appearance.
Yeah.
And so, and I really thank a lot of people around me because again, there was a patriarchy within me, right? I was kind of replicating some of those old things that I knew and didn't even recognize, right? Like cooking incessantly for my son, thinking like he's so wonderful and precious. And some of my friends were like, this is nonsense. Put that down and let him do this,
Yeah.
When is he going to cook for you? And I had to catch myself and say, oh, yeah, my goodness. And for them to call him on some of his nonsense,
Yeah.
and to allow them to have those relationships with them. That was really important.
You also talk about how after getting divorced in about 2005, that this was kind of a source, it could be a source of shame. You weren't celebrating it as though you had been released from the shackles or whatnot. You actually did want a family for your son that included a father in it. And so that was a tricky thing for you. You wondered about men in your life, like who could be influential as a man.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things I discovered too in writing my book was how much love there was too from my father, from my brother, from extended family, right? Like these are the complexities of things. And of
Yeah.
course, then you have to make your choices of, love and abuse. Can they go together? And often no, you got to break certain cycles. And I think too, like with my son, it was really important to break those cycles, but also not totally break away from male influences. He's a cis het boy growing up, and what should I bring into his life? And I write about how it was everything from like the Boy Scouts of America to extended friends, and remarrying a white American guy. Not that I was going for a white American guy, but it just so happened. But I think examining and seeing how do we call in the good men, how do we call in the goodness of
Mm-hmm.
men who might be complicated as well, right? Call in all those influences because there's so much love there. And I've been thinking of that again recently, after this election, and I feel like wow, I don't believe in the whole thing of the polarization as much, because I think we've always been polarized.
Mm-hmm.
In America. There's always been oppression of the marginalized. It's just that some people are beginning to notice it now versus before, and a lot of marginalized people, of course, always knew of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think of like the goodness in people, and how do we call that in? And there's a lot of research that's been done that I talked to some of these researchers on how to do that for the book.
And you talk about your son's relationship with your father, so his grandfather. And that raised interesting questions because his grandfather was so kind to him, which was different from how your dad was with your brother, and also different from how your dad was with you. And so that your son kind of wondered about that. Like, wait, what did grandpa do? That didn't sound like him.
Yeah, I'll never forget when I was, when he was old enough, like I think he was about 14 or 15, and I was telling him, about domestic abuse, and he used to beat your grandmother. He used to be really violent on us, and he said, "What, Nanaji?" That's what he calls it.
Yeah.
No way, like no way. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're right. Like he's changed so much, he cannot even visualize it." There's such a tenderness to him and such sweetness and kindness in him now, and that to me is an interesting example, right? Like it's so complex. Of course, I've needed years of therapy to think about these things. So therapy is so extremely important for anyone who's had any contact with the patriarchy, of course, in any part of the world. But really thinking about forgiveness, calling in relationship, etc., and to think of my father and his apology, that he has, at least with me, I hope he's done that with my siblings as well, but with me, he's apologized and he's stopped his violent behavior, and occasionally violence in words, or even that I haven't seen in a long time, and regret for his own life and the mistakes he made. And, at some point, maybe I'll talk about how I've gotten letters from men from different socioeconomic and racial backgrounds who have written to me to talk about my book, to say what it made them think about, and the regrets of how they were raised and the things that they did, and their demeanor toward other people in their lives. So my father's apologized for those and definitely wanted a relationship with his grandchild, with me. And so my son, knowing the things that my grandfather was responsible for, still wanting to have a relationship because he sees the tenderness being more front and center now than the violence.
It's such an important point to talk about how men are harmed when feminism isn't carrying the day. That your father, in some ways, was harmed. Your brother was harmed. Their relationship is broken because of the difficulties they experience. Men are cut off from their emotions. They believe they need to be in charge and be the provider, and there's all this social pressure, and also that they need to control women or that they need to disconnect from other people. And these are some of those messages you wanted your son to avoid or to not take in. I mean, you saw what it did to your dad. You saw what it did to your brother.
Absolutely. And I often think, right, like if someone sees this book, How to Raise a Feminist Son, and there's so much vitriol like that came my way, right, after even from the name of the book, right, just upset a lot of men especially. And I wanted to say, no, wait, this is about love. Like, do you not see, I love my son. And so this is an act of love to raise him as a feminist, because for him, what it meant was like me telling him, yeah, of course you can cry as much as you want. That was a really sad thing. Of course you can cry at this beautiful art. Of course you can cry when you watch this movie. Of course you can cry anytime, like not ever saying walk it off or you will be seen as less than. I was like, we'll find the people, we'll find our people, right? We'll find other people who think differently and think like us. You will find a partner who cares about these particular things, right? So you don't have to be protector and provider. Recently, I was having a conversation with him and saying, like, do you think you might want to be a stay-at-home dad? Would you want to be not the breadwinner? And he was like, yeah, that would be really cool. Right?
Yeah.
And so I want him to have that. And I wanted him to have the whole spectrum of human emotion, right? So that's what it's really about. Like, you can feel what you want to feel. You can choose how you want to live your life. You can be in conversation and negotiation with your partner about these things without feeling like you failed in some way. My first book was about farmer suicides, and it's looking at the pressure of masculinity that all these farmers dying by suicide because they feel in India that like they failed their families and they failed as men. And I think that's, and it's such a capitalist notion as well, right? Like, so capitalism and patriarchy sort of intersect, and no one wins in that situation. My son is not going to win if he's seen as this strong protector, provider guy. That's not a win for him. That's not what he wants. So who is winning, and what's he going to have to shut down? And when he shuts it down, where is that going to go?
That's Sonora Jha. We're talking about her book, How to Raise a Feminist Son, Motherhood, Masculinity, and the Making of My Family. And I want to mention she also just barely published a brand new novel. It's called Intemperance, and it's about a twice-divorced, middle-aged, disabled Indian-American professor who's looking for love. So if you're looking for some nonfiction to read, check out Intemperance. Her other novel, The Laughter, came out a few years ago, and it won a Washington State Book Award. It was also long-listed for the 2024 Aspen Awards Literary Prize. Sonora's journalism work has appeared in places like the New York Times, the Seattle Times, and elsewhere. She grew up in Mumbai, India, and moved to the United States, where she calls Washington State her home now. Sonora, of all the things you needed to talk to your son about, it seemed to me, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just the impression I got, it seemed to me that sex was maybe the hardest thing for you. Did I pick up on that correctly?
Yes, absolutely
Okay,
correctly.
yeah. Why was it so hard?
Partly cultural, right? Like partly like I'm, from India. There's like, oh my God, like we really need your dad now.
Okay.
And it came up all of a sudden, right? And of course, his dad was not in the car in Seattle as I'm driving him back home, my kid home from his middle school. But he had this question about, when are girls ready to have sex, right? And I was just like floundering. I was like, oh my goodness, where is this question coming from? Can we talk about, let's go, eat some donuts or something? Try to distract him. But yeah, I wasn't ready for that because it was not something that we talked about in India. It's something that across gender, even like usually you say, go talk to your mom, go talk to your dad. And we thereby sort of like divide up the genders and these binaries that must stay within their realms. So it was difficult. I know that it's difficult for several people, right, across the world. Like it's all of us culturally have different degrees of comfort around talking about sex. So it was difficult for me, but it was also, I saw how necessary it was. And so I went by instinct. And I think now, if I were to do it again, I would educate myself a little more. But my instinct and my own lived experience, right? So I said to him that, that maybe sometimes, boys may be more ready than girls. There's an emotional attachment to it. There's more to it. Both of you should be should be friends. You should care for each other. It's more about that intimate connection with, all the things that I truly believed and felt was something that I talked to him about. So it was definitely not, the kind of thing that was told to me. You wait till you're married, be a virgin, and, those kinds of things.
Yeah, abstinence only, kids.
Right, right. And so then it was really open. Like he probably shared with me more than I wanted to know, or had more questions for me than I was potentially comfortable with, but also not, right? Like when he went to college, was at this, when America was also learning much more about date rape. So it was just
Yeah.
before a couple of years before the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
And I think that conversation, so I remember calling him and saying, hey, what's up with this date rape situation on college campuses that I'm hearing about? And I'm myself an educator, so I was learning about these things on my own campus as well. And so, and he filled me in. He said, we're doing all these different things. I forget what it was, but there was all these campaigns at the university and his college, and talking to him about those things over the telephone while he was away at college was both illuminating for me and also giving me a sense, both about the culture and also about his mind and the way he was approaching things, right? And again, there was so much going on in the media where we were able to talk about personalities in the media and what that was about. And so those roles sort of flipped, where I was asking more questions and saying, tell me more about this. Explain to me what this is about. What are your friends saying? What are girls around you and young women around you saying? And so in becoming a sort of informant about those things, I think he was also fleshing out his ideas and his way of how he wants to show up as a young man.
Right. And you also didn't shy away from talking about your own experiences with assault, but you do say that you wish maybe you did it a little bit differently than how it went.
Yes, because again, around 14, 15, as he's developing into a young man, right, I'm giving him a sense of his own physicality and the fears of women and safety and consent and those kinds of things. And so I talked about a couple of my own experiences with sexual assault, but also told him about the breadth of it, right, like that it was almost near constant. And maybe we weren't in that context. This was very true of me in an Indian milieu. And maybe we're not in that context, but in a different context here. Like I said, there's other things like the date rapes and the other ways in which those things happen.
Sure.
And so I think later he told me that made him feel very insecure about us as a single mother and child. And he felt scared. He felt scared and anxious about that. And I really regret that, because I feel like I didn't realize he didn't show that, and I didn't realize that would be an effect. And so in talking to therapists later for my book, I even realized that there could have been different ways in which to approach it, maybe along with a therapist, maybe along with a family therapist, and, to say that sometimes my own responses to certain things may be a certain way because of my own experiences of sexual assault, right? So, and what does that mean for him to have a healthy male sexuality? So I just wish I hadn't frightened him in that way. And that step, we're all going to have regrets as parents, and that's my big regret.
Yeah, it makes sense. You also really made a point to talk to him about his own body, talking about body image. Maybe it wasn't on your radar before. And I think a lot of people understand that women are bombarded, girls and women are bombarded with messages about unrealistic body expectations. And obviously, people that don't fit the binary are bombarded with messages about what they should look like as well. But when we think about boys, we don't often think to worry about them as much. And you say, maybe we should take a second to think about this, because there are some unrealistic body expectations that are being placed on boys and young men now. And this actually isn't a conversation that we can avoid at this point.
Absolutely. That one really caught me by surprise, because I remember when he was headed to a pool party. One of his friends had a swimming pool and they were going. And I ran after him, thinking he had forgotten his bathing suit, his swimming trunks.
Yeah.
And I said, here's your swimming trunks. And he said,
loved to
no,
swim,
no.
right? Like he was a swimmer.
He loved to swim. Yeah, he loved to swim. He used to harass me to go to the swimming pool the community swimming pool in Seattle. And so
don't forget your trunks.
Right. And he said, no, I don't plan to swim. And I was like, what? What do you mean? And so then he said, yeah. And then later he told me, I feel like I'm very fat. And he was very thin. I mean, he's basically not even average, a little under average, the thin boy.
Mm.
And so I was stunned by that. And I remember just wondering, like, how on earth did I miss this? How did I miss that body image is something that can happen to boys, poor body image. And later, of course, I see, his friend, and I think I have this in the book as well, his friend, CNI, she's named in the book as well. She said something about how he was a great ally to her because there was I think it was another pool party or a pajama party, something that she didn't want to go to.
Yeah.
And he said, oh yeah, let's just stay back and let's not go. And they're still close friends.
Yeah.
And she said, I felt such solidarity. And I realized, like, okay, so, in a way, he showed up as an ally because he'd had the same feeling. Not that I want my son to have to
Sure.
go through poor body image, but for him to be empathetic in that way as well. But yes, we definitely need to think of that. And we're seeing that, right? Like young men pushing themselves at the gym, what's called now the gym cell. I don't know if you've heard this term. Yeah, it's in the manosphere and the gym cell. And
they're like trying to shape their jaws with this like different ways or
Yes. And those kinds of expectations of masculinity of a certain kind, sort of brawn. That is stunning. And yes, my son goes a lot to the gym too, so I still worry about it. I don't think he's a gym self for sure.
Yeah.
but I know that he cares a lot about that, and there's all the protein shakes and stuff, and so that's a constant thing that I monitor so that I can sense where is this coming from, a place of health. And I'm always very happy to see him eating a bunch of ice cream, to know that okay, he's still eating ice cream. That's good.
You also know as his parent that he's not going to be perfect. Like he's going to make mistakes. For all the discussions you had with him and all the teaching you tried to do, you also know he's not perfect and there will be bumps in the road. And you write about one of these bumps in the road. It happened while you were on vacation. He had a younger stepsister by now because, as you mentioned, you had remarried. Take us to that moment on vacation. What happened?
Yeah. So his stepdad and I and our two kids were headed to Soap Lake in this beautiful little town in Washington. And she's about 4 or 5 years younger than him. And she was telling him about wanting to grow up to sing like Taylor Swift. And he had opinions about it as just a little boy, like, I think he was 13 or something. And he was like, oh, no, you can't sing as well as and you'll never make it. Very few people make it in the industry. And she started to cry.
Yeah.
And I first, checked with her and I said, why are you letting him ruin your dream?
Yeah.
And why are you making him in charge? Like, why does he get to have an opinion on your dreams and on your ability to sing? And, don't make him sort of give him that power over you.
Yeah.
And then, and I had him apologize to her. And I said, like, look at what you're losing out on, right? Like someone's telling you about their dreams. What a gift, right? And I know he's not in the mood for that. Like everyone's hungry and cranky. And of course, he doesn't want to hear this gift of, being told about this little girl's dreams. And he's like being dismissive. But also in that moment, how important it was for me to teach him to apologize and not feel like someone's tears and putting someone down is okay. And especially a little girl who's looking up to you as her stepbrother and wants to share this with you. And so I think in the years since as well, I have seen two things, right? One is he still is a mansplainer. And I hope he does that only. I hope he only does that with me. I keep telling him, like, look, you can try that with me and I will push back. You don't think you can get away with this with, women, smart women around you. And he was like, no, I don't mansplain. And I said, yeah, except to me, right? And because this is what you're doing is definitely mansplaining. So that I don't think, when I talk about the ways in which I haven't been able to raise him to be entirely a feminist, that might be one. The other thing too is like the apology, right? I think one thing I've definitely seen is that most people find it hard to apologize, but for some reason men do find it very hard to apologize and to say that they were wrong or say that they don't know, which is again a privilege that we should give them to say, I don't know. I don't have to know everything. I don't need to know everything. I don't have to fix everything. I don't have to provide. I don't have to show up in all my masculinity all the time. And so, I think that's something we need to track as well. And I think a heartfelt apology is something everyone deserves, and everyone deserves to feel being the giver of an apology, the peace that comes with that.
And you also say we shouldn't assume that people know what an apology is or like what makes an apology good. You include research in the book from a negotiation and conflict management research where you lay out kind of the steps of apology. There's expression of regret, explanation of what went wrong, acknowledgement of responsibility, a declaration of repentance, an offer of repair, and a request for forgiveness. And then you go one step further than this. You add some nuance to that last one, the request for forgiveness. And you say that there should be no demand or expectation of forgiveness. I think this is crucial.
Absolutely. I mean, it comes so quickly, right? Like, because it's almost like a figure of speech. Please forgive me is supposed to be almost like an apology itself, right? But it's such a burden on another person, right? Like that I now have to take care of you and you being forgiven, rather than me being able to sit with my feelings around it, right? One should be able to say, I've heard your apology. Maybe say, yeah, well, thank you for apologizing, but not necessarily offer up forgiveness or comfort the person who has done you some harm or has been insulting or whatever it is. I do think one should not demand an apology from another one, or even demand forgiveness.
Yeah, and I think men are often socialized to expect reciprocity we feel entitled to the forgiveness, I think. I love this quote that you include at the end of this section from Dr. Karen Weisbard, who says, in an apology, a person can say, I made a mistake. I know I hurt you. I'm sorry. I'm not going to go out of my way to compensate or try to fix it in a way that only serves me. That's really interesting. That shone a light on some of my past apologies in very uncomfortable ways. Where it's like, I'm going to make it up to you even if you don't want me to. And then she goes further and says, I don't need you to forgive me, but what I want to say is that I'm here to stand in the discomfort of what I did, and I'm here to repair our relationship. So being willing and not entitled. I noticed in that story with your stepdaughter at that time, you didn't go, okay, apologize to her. Okay, tell him it's okay. No, she needs to process her feelings and do what she will with them. And it's not to say you don't like forgiveness. It's to say people aren't entitled to it, and that process cannot be rushed.
Absolutely. And I do write later in the book too, right? Like how this came back to me in some ways because I hadn't internalized it. We were in India on that same trip, and I was saying to my son as he was leaving to go to Singapore where his father is, and I said, hey, I'm so sorry you didn't get to meet your uncle because we have a rift, and my brother, and I don't talk to him ever since his last violence upon me, and I said, I'm sorry you didn't get to talk to him. My family just wants me to forgive him, and I'm finding it very hard to do that. So maybe by next time I will have, and then you'll get to meet him. And he said, you're finding it hard to forgive him, but has he asked for your forgiveness? Has he apologized? And it hadn't struck me until then that no, he hasn't apologized. Leave alone asked for forgiveness, right? Like, no, that hasn't happened. And he said, well, then the ball's in his court. It's not your fault. And why should he expect that? And why should anyone expect that? He hasn't even apologized to you. And then he gets on his flight and leaves, and I'm standing there just stunned and thinking about, wow, I hadn't even imagined that was available to me, this thing of wanting an apology from my brother all those years.
Yeah, it's almost like in your family relationship, because you've read a bunch of feminist theory, you've thought about this, you've written books about it, but then I think when we slip back into our families of origin, sometimes we just go right back into those old patterns of thinking and don't even realize it. My heart broke seeing, if I remember correctly, your brother was violent with you at his wedding. Was that right? Yeah. And and just left it there. And so that shattered that relationship. And I just kind of saw you in that moment, and I saw your son witnessing you and being like, that doesn't seem like, that's interesting that mom didn't notice this. I'm going to point this out here. This is one of the ways you knew that the feminism you hoped so much for him to adopt was coming through, because you were learning from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so in later years, I mean, even now, right? Like I catch myself. I think a huge part of this thing is also living a feminist life, right? Like really intensifying that and questioning yourself, and until it becomes practice, until it becomes your way of being in the world, right? And I think too, there's such a lot of deeply internalized patriarchy in us. There's so much judgment that I may have of women, right? And I have to catch myself in that situation. But also how much we serve the patriarchy. And the patriarchy is, of course, not all men. A lot of that footwork, or the work of the foot soldier, is done by women upon other women. Women policing other women, right? Whether it be in fashion and how we dress and what we wear and how much skin we expose or don't expose. We are doing that work for the patriarchy. So I think, sort of like staying in question of myself around that, and also like constantly forgiving as well, right? Like in all this, you have to keep forgiving yourself and be gentle. Be gentle with the people in your life. Be gentle on yourself as a woman as well. If you've survived, all kinds of things, just be gentle on yourself, and definitely find ways for self-love. That's something that's deepened now for me in the past few years. Self-love, self-forgiveness, and also a profound love for other women and other people of other genders, that are especially people who are marginalized and minoritized. Yeah.
Yeah, your chapter 12 is really helpful with this, when you include a list of things you think you might have messed up on, because again, our kids aren't going to be perfect, and we aren't going to be perfect. Aunts and uncles aren't going to be perfect. Adults aren't perfect. And you say things like you wish that you taught him to cook, or that you let him mansplain too often, or you would talk about your body or your weight in negative ways, and you think that wasn't great. Sometimes you wonder about having raised him away from home, or you sometimes regret not modeling a sustained relationship. So there's a lot of regrets you have, but you also do, as you were just saying, invite people to be gentle with themselves and be willing to extend forgiveness to ourselves in the ways that we fall short.
Absolutely. And especially as parents and mothers, yeah. Yeah.
It's a weird balance, because it's like, I don't want to be a weirdo that just like automatically is like, oh, well, forgive myself. Cool. I'm good to go. I never have to like, right? It's like, I want to maintain like a healthy level of anxiety about the crappy stuff I do. I don't know. It's like a hard balancing act.
I think if you're a generally thinking, empathetic person, anxiety is going to come for you anyway, whether you
Yeah,
like it or not.
exactly.
There are new things to be anxious about and new ways to mess up, right?
Yeah. Yes. Let me find all the ways to be anxious. Excellent. Well, let's talk about how we can tell we're succeeding or doing a good job. What are some signs to you that you advise people to look out for to see if feminism is catching on with your child as they're growing up?
Absolutely. Empathy, as we talked about, right? Empathy is so important. Just seeing them being able to imagine other people's lives, other people's pain, other people's triumphs, other people's desires and hopes. It doesn't always have to be pain or feeling, oppressed or marginalized. Being able to be followers rather than leaders constantly. This is especially for cisgender heterosexual men who are constantly cast in this thing of leaders and being, CEOs or reaching the pinnacles of things and being providers. Like, no, I'm going to follow. Seeing that they can see and cheer for women in public life. I think that is really important. I think, the fact that we haven't had a woman president in the United States should definitely be something that you talk to your son about and ask, wonder along with them, like, what do you think is going on? Do you imagine yourself as a president one day? Will you imagine your sister or someone else as a president one day? What's going on with that? So it isn't just a dream for a little girl to have. It's also a dream for a little boy to have.
Yeah.
And so if you're seeing if you're seeing your child engage in those things, I think you're on the right track. If you're seeing them be drawn more to, kinder, tender-hearted young boys in their friend group, right? I think that's really important. Having healthy relationships and friendships with the girls in their schools is really important. All these uh, little things that listen to the conversations even in the car and stuff.
That's
If you have
Sonora
a bunch
Jha.
of
We're
boys in the
talking
back,
about her
listen
book, How to
to
Raise a
whether
Feminist
your
Son,
child
Motherhood,
stands up for
Masculinity, and the Making of
something
My Family.
against a bully,
Sonora
maybe,
is an
or stands up
essayist,
and
novelist,
speaks
researcher,
out,
and professor
those
of
kinds of things,
journalism
and
at Seattle
really thank
University.
them for that, or encourage that and acknowledge those things. I think all those little ways in which you know. And then one day they're organizing a protest against the Dobbs decision in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and giving you an update about it.
Right, right.
That's Sonora Jha. We're talking about the book, How to Raise a Feminist Son, Motherhood, Masculinity, and the Making of My Family. She's an essayist, novelist, researcher, and a professor of journalism at Seattle University. Her latest book actually just came out. It's a new novel called Intemperance. So if you're looking for your next piece of nonfiction to read, I suggest checking that one out. Okay, Sonora, How to Raise a Feminist Son ends with a really crucial point about labels. I can imagine somebody hearing the things you're trying to teach your son and saying, why are we calling this feminism? Why do we have to use that word? It just sounds like you want people to be good to each other. And as you're describing some signs that we can look for that signal a boy's budding feminism, you wrap that up by arguing why it is important to still talk about it as feminism. And it's a really great excerpt here. Would you mind reading that for us?
Yeah, sure. Some of these things may seem like boys just being compassionate, empathetic, kind people. Why label it feminism, you may ask? We label it feminism because their compassion, empathy, and kindness is turned in its attention to the female condition, the condition of half of humanity. It is alert to misogyny, which turns the knife just a little more into the cultural wound. Our boys notice the turn of the knife. They name it. They see how they are complicit. They call it out. They amplify. They learn when to be quiet and sit down. They learn when to get out of the way. And they heave together to topple structures that give them an unfair advantage. Feminism is about love. If we teach our children this new way to love, we will see that love grow and take new forms that will make our hearts burst open at unexpected moments. And when this happens, we will slow down to feel the world turning, changing. When our boys do or say something that shows us that we have grown feminists, we will celebrate the heck out of that success. We will shout out our boys' feminism from the rooftops.
I love the joy that you talk about in experiencing a boy's feminism, because I think all too often I see such negativity about boys and men, and it's understandable in feminist conversations, especially on social media, where people will just say like stuff like, why are men? Or like, men are garbage, men are trash, and this kind of thing. And it's like, in trying to raise a feminist son, that's not what I want him to see. I want him to feel supported and loved in his efforts, and also not drowned by guilt and the weight of everything that patriarchy does. So it's not about making him feel guilty. And I think some people that push back against feminism will try to say, oh, you're just trying to make people feel bad. That's not what we're going for here. You close the book on a celebratory note.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, feminism really is about love. It's really getting so much more of a life, as sort of like multi-layered and rich life for your boy, and having him be available to love and be open to love in so many different ways. And it's just a kind of way. It's also really good for their health. Feminism is really good for a boy's health.
Yeah.
How about that?
It's true. I love that. All right. Well, Relationscapes always wraps up with a segment called Regrets, Challenges, and Surprises. And this is an opportunity for you to reflect back on the book itself. Is there anything you would change about it now that it's been out for a while? What were the most challenging things about doing this project, or surprises? What surprised you most as you were putting this book together? You can talk about any of those, whatever you like.
Yeah, I think I'll talk to what surprised me the most. And what surprised me was really the letters that I got from men.
Hmm.
I heard from men in India. I heard from men in the US. I heard from older white men. I heard from men of color. And most of the letters that I got from white men at different ages were the ones that surprised me the most, where they were talking about how they were raised with different values. They were raised to be a protector and provider. They were raised to be suspicious of women. And they were raised to feel like they were the ones who will discipline their family and will have rules and be the rule keeper, and not be sort of tender-hearted or seem weak in the way that they were raised to, boys don't cry, those kinds of things, and the loneliness of that, right? And men using those words in their letters to me, saying, I've ended up lonely because I ruined my relationships with my family, with my, was violent, or I was abusive, or I was just emotionally unavailable. I didn't know how to deal with this. I felt like what I was doing was the right thing. I thought that I was supposed to go after the woman, and, ended up just making a mess of things. And so the regret and the loneliness and the desire, the looking back and seeing how things could have been different, and how, those that have young boys in their lives saying that, thank you, because I have a young, I've just had a son or I have a young boy in my life, and I definitely want him to have a different way of being in the world than the one I was raised with. That blew me away. And those things really surprised me, because I was sort of ready for the pushback and the backlash, of which there was enough, but these sweet, tender letters really moved me to tears and pleasantly surprised me.
That's awesome. With the other backlash, do you feel like that's ramping up at all? It seems like there's this pushback against DEI movements. There's it's become a political football now.
Absolutely.
The mainstream parties have taken it up, yeah.
Yeah, and this whole thing with the trad wife, what's that?
Yeah,
Explain that to me,
yes.
Blair, explain it. I
Oh,
don't get
well,
it.
I hope to have episodes about it, because I need to get my head around it too.
Yeah. There's so much that just is stunning, right? And at the same time, you see it. I mean, there's definitely pushback. They think that feminism or strong women are the problem, while actually they're not. It's because there wasn't enough of that, because there's an epidemic of loneliness, and most young men and older men are part of that epidemic. And it's kind of like, they've sort of been trapped on all sides. And I feel like, there's a rise of that, but there's also, I see in my young male students, and I see my son and his friends, there's a lot of kindness as well, and a lot of like really strong feminist support and celebration. And I think that's going to be important, and we shouldn't lose heart.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to say is the book closes with some great resources, and this was really helpful to me. In fact, I have been asking folks on Facebook in the past couple months, like, hey, I'm looking for stuff to watch with my kids. What are the books? Where are we at here? Because we need good resources. And so your book helpfully gives some great advice, some overviews of different books and movies and different media that we can check out. So thanks for including that as well. That's really helpful. And I've already dug into some of these with my kids. So this has been really great.
That's great. I'm so glad.
Yeah. And thanks for talking to us, Sonora. The book is How to Raise a Feminist Son, Motherhood, Masculinity, and the Making of My Family. This has been great, Sonora. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. This has been so wonderful for me too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Relationscapes. If this is your first time with us, welcome to the journey. It's great to have you along. I'm going to recommend a few fellow traveler episodes. If this episode resonated with you and you want to hear more about masculinity, check out Matthew Gutman's interview. It's called Testosterone, Y Chromosomes, and Other Manly Excuses. There's also Ronald Levant and Shayna Pryor's episode, Detoxing Masculinity. And then Frederick Joseph's interview is one that I really love. It's called Masculinity, More Liberated and Free. And then my good friend Mike Pope joined us for an episode called Learning About Masculinity Today from the Ancient Romans. It's a fascinating interview. So we're building up a nice little collection of masculinity episodes for you. Also, I really would love it if you would rate and review Relationscapes in Apple Podcasts. It helps spread the word about the show, helps the show build credibility, find new listeners, and it helps let guests know that this is a good place to come and talk about their work. You can also rate the show on Spotify if you're still listening over there. Also, invite a friend, send an episode to a friend, have them join us on the journey. Mates of State provides our theme song. I'm your host, Blair Hodges, a journalist in Salt Lake City, and I'll see you on another episode of Relationscapes.